I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Louise Mirrer, the president and CEO of the more than 200-year-old cultural treasure, the New York Historical Society. Welcome to CityWide.
Thank you.
So what's new at the Historical Society?
Lots. Everything. We just celebrated our 200th birthday, which was a really wonderful occasion with a mix of exhibitions that showcase some of our greatest treasures. For example, we own every single one of Audubon's original watercolors, which he did in preparation for Birds of America, and we had a wonderful exhibition with 40 of the 435 last February, accompanied by 3D birdsong. About 50,000 visitors came to view the birds, enjoyed them thoroughly, and many, many more will view them on our newly redesigned website. We also brought back to the Historical Society an 18th century coach, Cinderella-like coach. It was owned by the Beekman family and used by them to sort of tootle around town, around the streets of New York. A fascinating and beautiful, beautiful means of transport with wheels that whose contours really mimic the way in which the streets were in the 18th century. We've also reinstalled our Hudson River treasures, our Hudson River School painting, and if you want a respite from the summer heat, it's the perfect place to go to. Of course, we inaugurated our birthday year with a major blockbuster exhibition on Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that. And it was a little bit controversial, I think, also.
Well, that's good for a cultural institution. I'm not really sure why it was so controversial. I think Alexander Hamilton is, without doubt, one of the most remarkable of the founding fathers of this country, and one of the least recognized. He didn't become president, probably because he didn't live long enough to become president. But he
also wasn't a natural-born citizen. Right?
He wasn't, but actually he would have been able to become president because he came of age during the during independence for the country, and that was part of the rule. So, you know, more likely than anything else, he didn't become president because he was a very outspoken guy who wasn't political in the sense that that we've come to know so much in the modern era. But Hamilton really founded the world that we live in today. He understood very well the need for a central uniform currency, a central bank. He was so forward-thinking that he was way ahead of his time, and some of the great ideas that he had flopped because no one could recognize them as great in his day. So, for example, in the exhibition, we had a lovely oil painting from our collection of a waterfall in New Jersey, the Passaic Falls. Hamilton looked at the Passaic Falls and saw energy, but everybody else looked at the Passaic Falls and saw nature and beauty. And I think that that kind of dichotomy is something that we understand and appreciate today. That nature is beautiful and there's a lot of natural beauty in our surroundings, but that there's also progress to be made.
Now, it's 1804. The United States as a country is not that old. The city of New York is maybe, what, 100, 150 years old at that point. Whatever possessed leading citizens to come together to form a historical society? What history was it that they were going to study?
Well, it's a wonderful tradition I've inherited, because in 1804 there were 11 men, including DeWitt Clinton, who would become governor of New York and start the Erie Canal, or help to start the Erie Canal. And one chief among them, called John Pintard, who had the idea, along with his 10 colleagues and friends, that if you left it up to individual people to preserve historical moments that were of importance, then there was no telling what would happen. Some people would do a good job of preserving those moments, documents, objects. Some people would not. So, so they had the idea that they needed to found an institution, a museum, and we were New York's first museum, and that museum would be dedicated to collecting and preserving the most important moments in history. What's also really remarkable about this group of founders was that they understood completely that they were in an important historical moment, that they had witnessed something that really counted, that really could be instructive for future generations, and that therefore needed to be guarded, taken care of, and made available to the public. And that is a kind of recognition of your own historical moment that I think few people ever have.
Now, you've been in the same building, the institution's been in the same building for almost 100 years. Yes. What's that like, and what kind of constraints does that impose on you?
Well, it's, you know, it's a classical museum building of the first decade of the 20th century, which means that the galleries are not entirely hospitable to the kinds of exhibitions that you want to put on in the current moment. So it's a challenge to work with them, and I think that we're meeting that challenge pretty well. We took the decision this past year that our large gallery on the second floor, called Dexter Hall, really had to be redone. It just lacked the ability to show off any of our art, and it really is and should be an art gallery. So we did some substantial renovation in that gallery to improve it. And of course, on our fourth floor, we have not quite so brand new, but not very old, Luce Center, which is based on the theory that you should display everything that you possibly can if you're a museum. And we do. It's open storage and quite accessible, or I should say it makes our collection quite accessible to the public. So we've, you know, we have tried hard to sort of put the square peg into the round hole.
There was a period of time, I think, where the Historical Society was perceived more as New York's attic than its family room, and that families, particularly affluent families, if they didn't know what to do with their artwork or some leftover estate, would just simply donate it to the society. How much of that is still going on, and what do you do with all that stuff?
Well, we're very fortunate that people thought of us when they were wondering what to do with their possessions that you know, they just didn't quite have a use for, but had some sense that it was part of history. Because a lot of our collection is drawn from those kinds of donations, and we're extremely fortunate. We have a spectacular silver collection, for example, and we have lots of. You know, I think one of the delights of heading the New York Historical Society is knowing that in the building in which I have my office, I can move around and find some quirky object or document that no one barely knows exists and is fascinating, gives you, you know, really fascinating insight into the history of New York or the nation. I did have a visit from someone a few weeks ago who unloaded onto my conference table a treasure trove of photographs of the building of the Chrysler building. Remarkable photographs, absolutely remarkable photographs, and since we're celebrating the centennial this year, totally appropriate. We keep them. One of our challenges, I would say one of my biggest challenges, will be to really find the resources and the wherewithal to organize all of the, for example, photographs that we have. We've got huge numbers of them, and they're interesting, and we want to keep them. We want to have them, but we want to make them available.
All cataloged at this point?
No, not at all. About 25% of our library collection is digitized. Cataloging has taken place, and our library collection is cataloged in a sense. You know, it's you have a sense of the structure, you have a sense of what's there, but certainly we do not have available, and the digitizing project will make available everything that we have.
I would think that there's a huge intellectual property resource available in that also, that there may be some gold in them that are stills.
Well, maybe you'd like to help us. That is also one of our great ambitions right now. We know that we have lots of things that people would like to use, and occasionally we do make a very nice match, which brings us some extra revenue, which is wonderful. We have, for example, the complete papers of both Cass Gilbert buildings and McKim, Mead and White buildings, the architectural drawings and letters and so on and so forth. And, you know, occasionally Cass Gilbert building in New York is made into a condominium, and somebody wants to decorate the lobby with some original photographs of what the building looked like when it was put up, and we can supply them. What is your budget, staff, and number of visitors? We have right now a budget of about $15 million a year. We've made a huge leap. A little over a year ago, it was a $10 million a year budget. So we've our ambitions are great, and our budget has followed them. We have 102 staff members, and what was the third question you asked me? How many visitors? How many visitors? Of course, we have about 150,000 visitors a year right now. We hope to increase that significantly next year with some great new exhibitions that we'll be doing. We'll talk about that when CityWide continues right after this.
Once you see the world through math and science, you'll never see anything the same way again. Go to girlsgotech.org.
You'll see.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Dr. Louise Mirrer, president of the New York Historical Society. So tell me about some of the exhibits that you have coming up.
Beginning next October, that is October 2005, October 7th to be exact, we are opening a very large and, I believe, very, very significant exhibition on slavery in New York. It's a topic that really has never been dealt with by a major cultural institution before, but it goes right to the heart of the development of the city. The exhibition begins with the stories of the first 11 Africans who came to New York under the Dutch in 1627. And in fact, the story of slavery in New York lasts for 200 years. Slavery is not abolished, although there are many discussions about abolishing it in New York until 1827, July 4th. It's a fascinating story because when we look at the labor of enslaved people, we see that it was responsible for building some of the landmarks that we recognize and enjoy so much in New York today. Some of them have disappeared, but the names are there. For example, the Wall on Wall Street, Broadway. The original road to Harlem, which was Broadway, was built by enslaved people, as was the Bowery. The first two Trinity churches were also built by enslaved people. The labor of Africans and then African Americans was really quite critical to the development and prosperity of the city. And those same people contributed mightily, as we now do recognize, to the cultural development of the city as well. Even after slavery was abolished in New York, it was critical to the further development of the city because New Yorkers were extremely dependent on cotton. Cotton became the commodity, which dwarfed everything else that participated in the economy of the not only the city but the nation as well. So New Yorkers were involved in things that we don't even really link with the cotton economy. For example, sending grain to the South to feed people. Providing Southerners with hardware. I mean, Southerners would come up to New York during the summer months and they would buy feed and hardware and everything that they needed. New York manufactured what was called, in those days, Negro cloth, which was the cloth made out of cotton, but rough cotton, that was then sent back down to the South to clothe slaves. So that even after the abolition of slavery in New York, slavery was critical to the development of the city.
Do you expect this to be a controversial or painful exhibit for people?
Well, you ask a very interesting question. When I started work on this exhibit, and I've been personally very involved in it, although I enlisted a team of first-rate historians who have been just terrific in developing the exhibition. I thought only that this was going to be a really compelling exhibit because it would tell people something about their own history that they didn't know, hadn't recognized before. And, you know, controversy was the farthest thing from my mind. It's history. I mean, it's fact. It's not, this is an exhibition that has visuals in it, because we actually have a great painting collection that has lots of Africans and African Americans depicted at work and at leisure as well. But it's also heavily document-based, and I was just thinking, you know, this is historical. You know, you can't really talk about controversy, but there is something about slavery that suggests to people that, you know, it's got to be a controversial topic, and that's, you know, that's really of interest to me. As I said, I don't think the exhibition itself is controversial, but I think that slavery is going to be a difficult topic. There are in the exhibition many ads for runaway slaves and for the sale of slaves, and they're crude. They're difficult. They're difficult to absorb, to grasp, to believe that human beings felt and treated other human beings as they did in those days. But the exhibition also has something of a celebratory quality about it. New York was the center of the abolitionist movement. The Alexander Hamilton exhibit that we did last year had in it some documents from the Manumission Society, which Hamilton co-founded, along with John Jay and others, and documents from the African Free School, because Hamilton and other New Yorkers felt, unlike others, that African children and African American children could be educated.
Let me ask you this. There's an old aphorism that history is written by the winners, and yet we're in a period now where completeness or candor seems to have asserted itself in unusual ways. I'm thinking of Roosevelt Memorial, where there's controversy over whether the exhibit should claim that Roosevelt couldn't have done more to stop the Holocaust, or exhibits at the Smithsonian on World War II, perhaps downplaying the effects of the atomic bomb, or even in New York, the plans for the memorial at the Freedom Center, whether or not it should talk about oppression in which the United States participated, perhaps with Native American Indians, in a celebration of the path of freedom. So in that context, should history be about confronting facts that make us uncomfortable, or should it be about celebrating the progress that we've made as a society?
I think you can do both. I would be very saddened were history to be told in institutions like the New York Historical Society in a way that avoids uncomfortable topics. I think that we can learn from the past. I think we do learn from the past, and we ought to learn from the past. And I think if that means confronting some aspects of our past that we're ashamed of, or are difficult for us to really look at and recognize ourselves as participants in, I think that that's a road to the future, and a road to really making progress. At the same time, I think that we should not focus exclusively on redressing those things that characterize our past, of which we are ashamed. I think that there is a lot to celebrate in American history. I think one of the wonderful things in New York these days is the number of immigrants. I mean, so many people coming to New York. Why are they here? You know, it's easy to say they're here for economic advantage, but what underpins that economic advantage? It's not, it didn't just sail forth out of nowhere. And so I think in really celebrating the historical figures and topics that enabled us to offer to the world such riches as we do offer, is worthwhile as well. I think that that's, you know, we should see history for what it was and what it can teach us.
Talk to me a little bit about historical tourism and as a market and as the very competitive environment that you're in New York.
Well, it's tough. I mean, we're, you know, one of many great cultural institutions in the city, and just saying that we were the first is, you know, really not enough to entice people in. We have great treasures to offer that no one else has. We really do. And if you want to know about the history of New York and the nation, it really begins at the New York Historical Society. But you know, you really need to establish that in terms of competing with other cultural institutions in New York. And I think we've come some way towards letting people know what it is they can find. We know there's a market because one of our great friends, David McCullough, just published a book, 1776, and I'm told that his publishers had such great confidence in the market for that book that they did a first run of 2 million copies. So we know there are 2 million people out there, at least, who are a potential market for what we have to offer. We are really intent on reaching out to that group of people who love history, are passionate about learning about the past, and really want to just have a huge thirst for encountering in a great exhibition or among a great group of people the opportunity to debate and discuss the history of this country.
Well, it's also, I think, a service to the city in some ways, because I have the sense that there's a widespread perception across the country that New York emerged off of the boat at Ellis Island, that the whole city of New York and all of the ethnic groups just showed up one day on one boat, stopped at Ellis Island for a few days, and then New York City was born. And that period of time between the founding of the city in the 1600s and the big immigration waves in the early 1900s seems not to be part of the public awareness. So I think you do a great service to the city.
Yeah, well, you know, that's another interesting point for sure. Not to diminish at all the contributions of immigrants to this city, because they were huge. But I think one thing our slavery exhibition will show is that people who came to our shores unwillingly had contributions that were certainly on a par with any group that came here willingly as immigrants.
My thanks to Dr. Louise Mirrer, the President and CEO of the New York Historical Society. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us.